to another episode of Sembrando Ideales. I'm here with my co-hosts, Ali, Genesis, Guillermo, Dr. Carlos, and our guest for today, Miss Benita. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Rebecca, and this is Sembrando Ideales, and we're going to be talking today we're talking with Benita, what she does. So I'm just going to give you the floor and go ahead and let us know a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Benita Robledo. I work in ethical fashion, primarily in, I'm really concerned with clothes that are good for people and for the planet. Fashion is a $1.2 trillion industry. It employs 40 million people worldwide, 80% of which are women. Most of those women are women of color. So what I really, really love about ethical fashion is that if you can change just a tiny portion of it, if you can really make a difference in how the fashion industry works, you are affecting the lives of millions and millions of people. So that's what I do. I advocate for fashion that's good for the planet, but I'm especially, I'm particularly interested in garment worker rights and how garment workers are treated. So that's very near and dear to my heart. So that's kind of, oh, sorry, what?
I was gonna say, and that's really, really where there's sort of some synchronicity with us because, I tell people the story of why I started the Foundation for Economic Democracy, and a lot of it has to do with my parents and my mom. And so the reason, Benita and I became friends, because of Bernie stuff, but then also we sort of kept in touch because I teach class on wealth and poverty. But, she's talking about my mom. My mom worked in the garment worker industry for most of her life. I think she started working when she was 16. And sort of, I saw the work that she had to bring home with her. I saw, what it did to her physically. Like, she has back problems. She was sitting down. I saw her, consistently get cheated out of her wages. I saw ICE, or back then it was INS, repeatedly do raids on her workplaces. And I saw her workplaces leave. Like, I saw them, like, because of NAFTA, like, close down shop here in the LA area and move over to Mexico. And so she, I remember the sort of just how exploitable, vulnerable, and disposable that industry treats workers of color, and so especially women. And so, I'm really always happy to have you talk about this stuff because for me, this is coming home.
Thank you. I mean, it just makes my blood boil, because these are people, people think it's kind of, like you said, garment workers are treated as this very disposable, unimportant sect of people. But do you know how hard it is to sew a straight seam? Like, do you know the skill involved? I just tried to put in like a zipper into a pillow. That shit is like so janky.
I literally know because my mom tried to teach me, and I almost like sliced my finger on the needle because it, like, you got to push the button, you got to push the footstool, and then it just runs like really fast.
I know. And I mean, that's like, even if you're just trying on like a little home machine, but then you get to these, industrial machines. Yeah. That shit is dangerous, and you have people working with highly technical fabrics and, all these little parts and pieces. And it is extremely, it is skilled work, right? Like, it is not something that anybody can pick up and do. And I'm sorry, even if anybody could just pick up and do it, whatever, they would still deserve a living wage. But on top of that, like, this is hard work. And
it would trip me out because my mom bought 2 machines like after her. So one of the things that happened when some of the factories like closed down and moved, my mom was able to invest in buying some of the industrial machines. So she has 2 of them. She has an overlock machine, and then she has a regular, just like sewer. And I would trip out, like, because, like, growing up in a Latino community, like, there's a lot of paternalism towards, like undocumented workers, immigrants. And so like, I never really thought, my people would tell me, my mom, she didn't graduate from high school. She had a third grade education. And so growing up, like you hear how people treat them, and some of you internalize that. And I remember, like thinking my mom, like wasn't smart, just because that's how society like acts towards immigrants. And I feel really ashamed about that. But then until I saw my mom actually fix a sewing machine, I was like, my mom's a fucking engineer, dude. Like,
Yeah.
like, this is crazy. Like, and like to this day, like my friends who their moms have machines, they'll call my mom, be like, hey, can I fix this? And she'll be like, oh, that's how you do this. And then I'm like, Mom, you never told me you knew this stuff. I was like, well, I had to, because I had to sew.
Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing about fashion in general, right? Like it's really considered unimportant. But fashion, when you are making clothes, you are doing math, right? That is like high level math that you're having to do to make sure that you're getting the curves and it's going to wrap around the body. I mean,
geometry, dude. I remember
you're doing geometry.
I remember so she was so like, eventually, at first she started out just making the stuff, right? But eventually she turned into she was the sample maker. So
Oh, wow.
so the sample maker, they give her like this, the paper version of like all the measurements. She's got to turn in like all the geometry into an actual dress and or shirt or whatever, and she's got to work with the models to make sure that they fit. And sometimes the samples they give her actually don't fit, and so she had to figure that stuff out. And like you said, it's all math. And so once I learned more about it, and this is another thing that I think is really important to talk about, is that like, when people talk about fashion, they're assuming like, New York runaway shit, right? But like, like, and this is one of the things that our society is really good at, in terms of like, Marx has this thing where he talks about commodity fetishism, where you don't see where the stuff comes from. And so, when we think of fashion, you're thinking Paris, New York, you're thinking Prada, like, all that stuff, right? But like the people who actually make that stuff, like, get completely erased from the story of fashion. And so when you even bring up the word fashion, I was having a conversation the other day with somebody, and I told them to follow a page or something. They're like, oh, fashion, it's clothes, whatever. Who cares about that stuff? I care about that shit because that fed me. Like the fashion industry, like my mom making the wages, and as terrible as it was, like that's how she made a living. And
Well, what cracks me up too is like you have people who are like, fashion, whatever. I'm like, oh, are you a nudist? Like, well, no. Well, okay, then you participate in fashion. I don't care if you wear a white t-shirt and jeans every single day. You are still participating in fashion. And what's really interesting, you bring up Prada and these kind of high-end, French and Italian designers. They're actually, for a huge portion of their workforce in Italy, are actually Chinese immigrants. So like, we have this idea, I think we have this, I can't even think of the word, we have this sort of fetish, I can't say the word. Sorry. I had a real mom day today.
it's cool. You're also you're on the East Coast, so like it's later for you over there.
It's so late. My baby's been so grumpy all day. Anyway, we think of our clothes that come from these high-end designers, like they're being made by couture, and these like, oh, these lofty Europeans,
as if they were like hand stitched by like some Italian leather maker, right? Like
exactly.
like a Ferrari or something like that, right?
Right. And it's like, they're facing a huge problem in Italy right now, because again, they're using a large part of their workforce are Chinese immigrants. And there's also like a huge backlash of xenophobia in Italy, and anti-Asian rhetoric and all stuff. So it's, people think the more you pay for something that you're actually getting a different quality. So I think people also differentiate garment workers in that sense, like, oh, you're making clothes for Kmart or versus you're making clothes for Versace. And sure, there are some components that may be different, right? There might be certain lines or certain things that are handmade, but for the most part, it's all the same people making all the same things. And that's why I think it's really important we tackle the garment industry as a whole, right? Because it's really how we think of garment workers, how we think of the people that make our clothes.
I remember my mom bringing home the like tags that go on clothes, and she's like, "Here, you want the fancy one?" So one of the lines she used to make was Ocean
Okay.
Pacific. And in the like 90s, that was like a surfer thing, and then in the late 90s, it turned into like, you know, like bougie, kind of a little bougie. And so she was like, "Here, still got a bunch of those tags left. If you want to add them to any of your clothes, like that's all we do. Like we actually make the same shirts and then put different tags on them depending on where they're going."
I think a lot of more like wealthy, affluent people who can afford these designer brands, just like the like exclusivity of it, like they like it that it's like a thing that only they can buy to show off their wealth, to kind of flaunt it.
Status symbol for
And
sure.
Yeah. And really it's just, it's better marketing, right? Like because sure, sometimes there's a difference in like the quality of the material or the quality of the stitching, but I'll tell you, a lot of times there's really not much of a difference. And I think that was really eye-opening to me when I first started getting into this, is when you actually learn how to look at clothes and how clothes are made, and you know how to look at the stitches and how to turn the garment inside out and test the fabrics. Once you learn all of that, you realize like, I have paid a lot of money. I haven't paid a lot of money. I've seen people pay a lot of money for very crappy clothes. And you're like, oh, this actually really isn't better. Or, you know, oh, this bag is by such and such designer. And you look at it and you're like, oh, this is just coated plastic. Like this isn't nice.
Yeah, it's not even
It
leather.
just has a label.
I always tell people you can get a better like a much higher quality leather bag in Mexico City, like from an actual person who makes leather work.
Yep.
And so I like and pay it, like get it for $50, right? And then you're buying, you know, $300 or $400 purses or shoes or whatever it is, and it's definitely not about quality.
Yeah.
But maybe you can talk a little bit about how did you get into this?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it by accident almost. So back in 2012, this book came out called Overdressed by Elizabeth Klein, and I highly recommend everybody read it. It's probably a little dated by now with some of the statistics, but the overall story and messaging is still accurate. And so I read this, and you know, it really went into just the harm that the garment industry does. And I decided I wasn't going to buy any new clothes for a year. And at the time I was an actor, and it was very hard to do that. So I think I lasted about 9 months not buying anything new. And then I was like, all right, well, I'll let myself buy some secondhand clothes. And then I sort of slowly kind of trickled my way back into buying fashion and fast fashion, to be honest. You know, like I said, I was an actor at the time. I was just starting out. I didn't really have a lot of money, and I knew the cost, but in a very abstract way. And then probably like maybe like a year after that, a friend of mine invited me to a craft show where her friend had a new line of jewelry. And we went, and I saw this necklace. It was gorgeous, but it was $70. And like, I mean, I was still used to buying Forever 21 at that point. So I was like, excuse me, I'm not paying over $10 for a piece of jewelry. That's crazy. And my friend was like, well, no, you have to hear the story behind this necklace. Turned out it was made by women in Ethiopia who had been kicked out of their village for being HIV positive, and had started their own village and kind of created their own co-op. And this jewelry was how they supported themselves and their family and the village. And on top of that, the metal beads were actually metal. The metal beads were melted down bullet casings. And I was just like, like completely floored. And I was like, oh my God, please take all my money. This is how, like, if I'm going to spend money, this is how I want to spend it. And that was the first time I really realized like what a direct impact I could make with purchases. And that's kind of how I got started. And then, you know, not too long after that, I had a digital network reach out to me and want me to create some content for them. And they were a fashion and beauty digital channel. And I was like, I don't know, I can't really, I'm not like a makeup person. I don't really, I still didn't think of myself as a fashion person. I thought of myself as someone who cared about human rights. When they said that, I was like, oh, well, I guess this counts. I was like, I could talk about ethical fashion. And that's how I started talking about it publicly. And, you know, since then, over the last, I guess about five years, you know, my thoughts and feelings on that have really evolved and kind of changed, right? Like, I think I started out where a lot of people start out, which is, oh, we can, you know, we just buy better and we'll buy our way out of this problem. And now I've kind of reached the point where I'm like, that doesn't work. We've tried that for 15 years. You're still buying into the system. And now I'm much more interested in using that energy to fight for systemic change while doing the least amount of harm possible, right? So mostly buying secondhand. And then when you do buy something firsthand, trying to buy it from an ethical brand. Nobody's perfect, but you know, that's sort of where I've landed now. And
it's also really hard, to be honest with you. So like I'll tell you sort of you know, we're going to be producing some like social justice like merchandise, t-shirts and stuff like that, right? And it took us like 2 months to find a union like shop that, not like, we have our own screen printing, we do a screen printing in house, but the t-shirts that we get, like it took me a while to find a union shop that actually produces them. Like,
that's heartbreaking. Unions are the best thing in the world. I love unions so much, and it makes me
and we found one. So like we now source our like our blank t-shirts and colors from this union shop, and then we produce them in house. But like it's not easy. Like for people that want to, there's not a lot out there.
Yeah. And I've seen that happen. There's another new initiative that I am on the I'm on an advisory committee for. And their main goal is really to consolidate all of that information so that brands who want to do better can easily find those shops, right? So everybody's not having to reinvent the wheel, but sharing those resources. So, you know, I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think if people knew, like, they, you know, and you know, like people are like, well, you know, then I have to mark up my prices because, you know, like it's more expensive, so we pay more. I mean, you know, it's cheaper for us to buy Hanes t-shirts, right? The big T. Right. But like, you know, I'm fine with it cutting $2 into like my t-shirt profit. Like it's $2 per, you know, whatever. It's not, I'm not gonna up my prices just because of that. Like,
well, and I think that's a really important point, right? Like people do always make that argument, but it really is just because they're not willing to cut into their margins. And a lot of times that has to do with, well, you have investors that you have to answer to, right? So it really boils down to just capitalism, right? Like, we should be okay with not making as big of a profit. Like really?
Especially when you said the industry is like a $1.1 trillion like industry. Like, I mean, like, okay, so that means you're gonna make, you know, $10 million instead of like, you know, like $12 million, you know?
And like, what are you gonna do with all that money? For real? Probably nothing good.
No, nothing. There's actually, so since you bring this up, there's actually, so in my wealth and poverty class, I found a game online called Spend Bill Gates' Money. and you can literally, you know, it has how much money he has, or had. I think it's a little bit dated, but like you can still like $90 billion, right? You can it's way more than that now, but like it basically like you can buy like my students are so floored when they find out that they can buy every single team in the NBA and still have a shit ton of money left over.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, yeah. I mean, I just blame capitalism for everything, but really, it's a huge problem, and it's like if we just were okay with not making such huge profits, we could fix a lot of things. And like, you know, it's funny, I get into this argument with people all the time where they're like, oh, what, you're just gonna be starving on the street? I deserve to eat. I should have a house. And I'm like, yeah, you should. That's not what I'm talking about. That is not the kind of wealth I'm talking about.
Yeah, people don't understand that like 10 people in this country have like all of that money that they think is going to impoverish them. Like I'm not trying to take the money. I'm not trying to take the money away from you.
Right.
I'm trying to take it away from the people who are like hoarding, like literally hoarding, like half of the world's wealth.
Right. Like this is not about you.
Yeah.
You
like,
know.
One of the ways that I like to explain to students is that like, you know, I think part of it is math. Like I think we have a difficult time with the math piece. People don't know the difference between a million and a billion conceptually. They just know that it's like more of money. So like you get to a million, oh, that's a lot of money. A billion must be just more of a lot of money. Right. So the way that I like to put it is in terms of seconds. A million seconds is 11 days. A billion seconds is 31 years.
That's such a good way to put it.
And so like when I tell students that, it completely blows their mind, and they finally get to the point where like, yeah, we need to eat the rich. Like
yeah, we don't need billionaires.
You know, like in especially in the context of like, you know, like people like you know, Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, like he doesn't want to give his workers, you know, $15 an hour, but like he just made $30 billion in the last year. That like, where's he gonna spend that money? He's not gonna.
What are you gonna do with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And billionaires, you know, I mean, this is a little off topic, but I keep seeing all these things that like Elon Musk wants to do and Jeff Bezos, you know, oh, we're going to build a hotel on Mars. There's this really funny meme. It was like, we're going to build a hotel on Mars. And somebody's like, can we just get healthcare? Like, we literally just want healthcare. Like,
yeah.
Nobody wants a hotel on Mars.
Like for the hotel on Mars, like that, all the money they're going to spend building that, like, probably 1/4 of that would like, you know, take care of everybody's housing. But yeah, sorry, we went off topic.
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
I know you were talking about how the thing that you're working on or that you're a part of is supposed to help companies kind of get connected with resources to allow them to practice more sustainable like methods of fashion. What do you think about greenwashing? Because I know that a lot of companies are like starting to promote that they're you know, producing a sustainable line, and now they have these like sustainability ambassadors, which are just like random celebrities that have zero qualifications whatsoever. I just like, what is the point of that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
There is no point in it except to pat themselves on the back, and it infuriates me. You know, one of the things that cracks me up, it doesn't crack me up, it makes me very, very angry, is, you know, you have something like H&M, right? You have a company like H&M who's, oh, they've got an eco line. You cannot, you know what, even if they made every single garment in an eco-friendly way, you are producing way too much clothing. You cannot be sustainable when you make that many clothes that quickly. Like you just can't. It is completely antithetical to their business models. And if you really dig down and look at what their sustainability initiatives are, they don't mean shit. They're nothing. They're absolutely nothing. And company after company does this. And that's why I think it's so important to have people who can call bullshit on that, right? Who can say, this is nothing. But you know, at the same time, I think that while I would love every consumer to become educated about this and to be able to spot that, the truth is most people probably aren't going to, because they have their lives. It's maybe not important to them, right? They're just not going to. And that's why I think it's really, really important that the activists and the advocates who do work in this space work on changing the system so that it's not possible for companies to do the greenwashing, or it's much harder for them to do that kind of greenwashing in the first place. Again, working on the system as opposed to expecting individuals to have to put in that labor.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick, I feel like the existence of an eco-friendly line is like an admission that all their other stuff is not eco-friendly.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I've thought of it. Like, you're just admitting your other stuff is horrible for the planet.
That reminds me of the McDonald's now made with real white meat, like the chicken nugget. I remember when they came out with that, I was like, so what was it made with before? But yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought of it like that, but that's exactly what they're saying.
And even then, like, it's not, like you said, it's not even really like eco-friendly, because it can't.
No.
You know, like all the waste that is that's created, that's made just to produce like one item of clothing, right?
Right. And that's not even taking into account what you're doing to your garment workers, right? Like, again, eco-friendly, I think people automatically assume that it means it's all rainbows and sunshine, and they kind of conflate it with ethical, which it's not. Those are two very different things, right? Eco-friendly is about how we treat the planet, and ethical is really much more focused on how we treat the people that make the clothes. And then, you know, you've got all these other terms, but that's generally how I see those terms used. But yeah, it's like they might as well be like, oh, and all our other clothes were made by clubbing baby seals. Right.
Yeah, and then just because they put it on a tag doesn't mean that it's actually verified, right? So I remember one of the things I show students is this clip from the corporation on sweatshops, and it says, you know, it's this guy who works on, I forget the name of the organization, but it's a sweatshop, you know, like investigation org, and you know, and they buy all the stuff that they're investigating, and so one of them was like Kathy Lee Giffords had a line of clothing, and it said, you know, 10% of the sales, 10% of the profits from the sale of this shirt goes to, like, you know, boys or kids or whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the people who were actually making it was like girls, like young girls, like 16, 14-year-old girls in El Salvador. And so, like, you know, like you said, it's all marketing.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of times, and this is a, you know, a really big problem when companies are audited, right? Are they self-audited? Right? A lot of people don't use independent auditors. So, you know, it gets really convoluted. And that's why I am such a huge proponent of secondhand, or one of the reasons that I love it so much is because the average person does not have time to think about all these things. So when I think of the consumer and how is the consumer going to approach this, that's why I'm like, just buy secondhand when you can, because then you don't have to worry, right? You really don't have to think about those things. You're really just taking something that is already in existence and giving it a longer life. And that is a really great thing to do. And those of us who do really care about this stuff and are really invested in this stuff, we'll take on the work of changing the system, but we'll take on, you know, like, look to us to like vet things in places, because otherwise it's just too much. And, you know, the fashion industry really counts on that, right? They count on their supply chains being really convoluted, because then it's harder to check.
I had a question for you about thrifting, since we're kind of talking about it.
Yeah. More
on how there's such a gentrification going on with it, specifically with a lot of resellers going back on like Poshmark and Depop and reselling thrift store prices like 5 times the rate.
Yeah.
How do you think we can combat the gentrification within our thrift stores with like still going to them, you know, and still using that as a resource?
You know, that's a really good question. And to be honest, I don't know that I have fully come to a conclusion that I feel really great about. I've seen a lot of different answers to this, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So I'll just tell you kind of what my general thoughts are. I don't know that I have a really great conclusion yet, but I think one, we have to keep in mind that there is a huge oversupply problem, right? So the idea that there aren't going to be enough clothes, I think, is a bit of a fallacy. Um, because even still, even with this gentrification that's going on, even with these, they're called like tag flippers. People call them tag flippers, right? Where you just like see a good tag and then you throw it up on one of these secondhand sites. Even with that, we are still sending tons and tons of clothing overseas, mostly to Africa, to sell in their secondhand markets, or they end up in landfills. So one, I don't know that I totally agree with that assessment. The part that I do find really concerning is that a lot of the name brands can be snatched up. I do think that over time, this is going to be a problem that kind of sorts itself out, because while we have a proliferation of these secondhand sites, anybody who uses them to sell clothes will tell you that it's actually incredibly difficult to sell clothes. And it's really not a system that works for people who aren't doing it full time. And even then it's difficult. So something that I've learned recently is like Poshmark, for example, unless you are relisting an item about 100 times a day, there's such a high volume of clothes on there that it's highly unlikely that your clothes will ever be seen, and you won't really be able to sell. So I know tons of people who have tried and failed at that. So I do think that is going to, I think it's going to work itself out. That's kind of my gut sense of it. In the meantime, though, like, for example, I love thrift shopping. So a couple of ways that I do it is, one, I really like to go to places that I know the money is going directly into the community, something that stays in the community. Also, I'm very careful about not buying things that are out of my size. So I'm a straight sized person. One of the areas where there actually isn't as much clothing is for plus size people. And I've seen lately people go in and buy these plus size garments and then cut them up and change them and make them work for themselves as a straight size. I personally really disagree with that, because I think they just don't have as many options. So that's what I like to do personally. And I also think that if you're not tag flipping and you really are just going for yourself, I think that's such a it's such a small number of pieces that you're getting, that I don't personally think that you're contributing to the problem. I think the greater good that you're doing is keeping clothes out of the landfill, or keeping them from being sent overseas, and kind of all the implications that come with that. And you know what? And if you really want, if you are really worried about that, then find other ways to thrift, right? Like maybe you don't go to your local community aid or your local thrift shop. Maybe you go to like a higher end thrift shop that is run by a person of color, or is in some other way gives back to the community. I think that in with a lot of things, but especially in the garment industry, right? Like it's such a complicated topic that I don't think there's any one perfect way to do it. I think it's about harm reduction.
It sounds to me like it's a good problem to have. In the sense that like it's not one, it's not massive. It's like, here and there. And to the degree that, like, you know, the system, this is where I want to go back to the conversation on the and not to sort of cut away, but like, I have sort of a follow-up question, which involves the workers, right? So like, if the focus is on the workers, you know, me thinking about my mom, like, if everyone started thrifting, my mom would have been out of a job. And so this is why I think, like, we have to really deal with the systemic issue of capitalism and how that is rooted in, like, you know, imperialism, and the fact that this is the only opportunity that a lot of people in other countries have, especially since outsourcing and globalization, is, you know, like, they purposely create these situations of, like, between a rock and a hard place. Right? So what do we do about that?
We change the system, man. There's some really good legislation that people are working on right now, to especially in LA, like for the garment workers in LA. That's really exciting. It's called SB 1. Oh, I forget the number.
140. I think I got an email about that.
Maybe. But it's really trying to abolish the piece rate, so not paying people by the piece, which is a completely ridiculous way to pay people and keeps them working in poverty. You know, and really working on wage theft. But I think that you know, to kind of circle back to your question about you know, what do we do about thrifting? You know, no one is going to do that to the point, like, we're not going to be out of new clothes being made, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. So I think that it's pitting two problems against each other that don't exist, that aren't, you know, they're not in conflict. Those things are not in conflict. And like you said, I think that's the system has purposefully set it up that way, right? Like, we keep trying, you know, I think the system keeps putting the onus on the consumers, and, well, what about this? And what about this? And, well, you know, and it's like, no, that's bullshit. You just need to pay your workers. You need to make less stuff. Like, it's actually very, very simple, right? Like, it's very simple. One of the things that has been horrific to see during COVID is that companies have stopped paying their garment workers for work that they already did. And yet these companies continue to be profitable, and their CEOs continue to make money.
And they applied for PPP loans.
But, oh, sorry, those things that you made me a couple months ago, yeah, I can't pay you for that. You know, it's like, no, it's really simple. Just pay people for the work they did in any other industry. That would not fly. Your plumber comes over, fixes your sink, and then you say, oh, thank you for the work. You know what? I got an email that I'm out of a job. So, or I'm making 30 cents less at my job. So I can't pay you. That shit's not going to fly. But because it is highly vulnerable populations who don't have access to attorneys, who don't have access to people that will give them a voice, these corporations walk all over them.
And let's be honest too, because they're women. Like, I think that factors into it. Like, obviously, and I know,
they're brown women.
Yeah, I just need to name that because it's sort of that paternalism where, like, you know, you don't take them seriously because they're women workers. Like, there's added sort of level there, and in terms of the history of, like, you know, women doing free labor, basically, it's just like, well, you know, this is equivalent to housework, so, you know, like, yeah.
Oh, it makes me so murdery.
It is.
It makes me so mad. Yeah, and, you know, I think that it's kind of like being in a toxic relationship with someone, right? Where they, like, try and confuse you with all of this stuff. They're like, oh, but actually it's, and it's like, no, it's not. It's not complicated. It's not, it's really not. Yeah. You might make slightly less money. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, capitalism is gaslighting, man.
It's gaslighting.
The ultimate gaslighting.
Yeah, which actually, to kind of, since we're touching on thrifting and capitalism, you know, I'm really, really excited that I am part of this steering committee for a new online thrift community that is going to be co-op based, and I'm really, really excited about it because our goal is really to give back to the community. So one of the really big issues that I've seen happen with other online spaces like ThreadUp and Poshmark
Depop.
is Poshmark, Depop, right? They have boards that they have to answer to, and so they become a money-making business, and it does not serve the sellers
Or the buyers.
at all, or the buyers.
And those boards have to answer specifically to venture capitalists, right? That invested in the app. And I like to call them vulture capitalists because that's what they do. They just looking for places to like extract profit from. And I'm really excited about this project too. Do you want to go ahead and name it?
Yeah. So it's called Style Crush. That's the working title. But it's funny. We actually, we were meeting with some attorneys last week, and we were really working on like the structure of the co-op and how it's going to look and who's going to answer to what. And the topic of investors came up and kind of what's going to happen with the money and all this stuff. And the attorney stopped for a second. He's like, well, I guess I should ask, like, are you guys looking to make a lot of money off of this? And we all sort of looked around and we were like, no. We were like, we want to make a decent, we want to make a fair wage. Like we want to, be compensated for our time. But we were all like, no, any extra money, we want to make sure it goes back to the community because like, we don't need that. And I think like, if more people just had that attitude of like,
I wish I could see the lawyer's face when y'all said that. Like,
well,
was it confusing?
No. So he actually, it's two of them. They work with a lot of like co-ops.
Was it Brett?
Yes.
Well, one of them was Brett. Yeah. So I recommended him. So like, yeah. I'm really excited about this project because one, it's gonna empower the sellers, right? So the sellers get to keep a lot of the profit that they're making. There's no like stakeholders, investors who are gonna come and take 10 to 30% like off the top, right? And also like that, that buyers can be part of a community. Now that's dope. That like I think in today's context of capitalism and how socially isolated people feel. Like, there's not enough places that I think we can be part of a community of like, just, like, oh, like I'm really valued in the space. And, so I'm really looking forward to that. But honestly, like my support, especially because I'm a fashion guy because I wear fashion, but I don't think about like, oh, I think this is awesome. And, this goes good with that. Like I put on jeans and t-shirt or whatever like fits that day. But the ramifications that this is going to have if we can help launch this, help y'all get it off the ground, is this provides a model for how to cut out like profiteers out of these industries that in the gig economy specifically. Mm-hmm. So like I think about the drivers and who drive for Uber and Postmates, I mean, and all those other companies, right? And how like there's these people who absolutely like not part of creating any type of value outside of the fact that they own the app that like connects the people making the food with the people delivering the food. And or in the context of like Uber, it's the people driving and the people riding. And so because they're the middle people, they get to like basically take a shit ton of money just because they provide that service. And like for me, like empowering the producer / like consumer and making sure that they're the ones that are benefiting from this economic relationship, that's just fucking awesome. So I'm really excited about it. Sorry, yeah. I took up your space. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I mean we're really excited about it too. And like you said, Brett having like a lot of experience in this space, he was just like, okay. he got it. But all of us looked around and we were like, no, we think if we made a lot of money off of this, that would actually be antithetical to everything we're trying to do. Like this should be empowering the community, right? This is empowering the sellers. This is empowering the buyers. And your question, Ali, about thrifting really comes into play here. So one of the things that's really important for us is, people, some people who are like tag flippers, right? Maybe people who thrift, who want to go through the, cut this out for a second. I gotta regroup my thoughts for a second. Okay, we'll pretend that last 10 seconds didn't happen.
Can I pick up your train of thought right there?
Yeah.
Like as someone who doesn't like going to stores, period, thrifting, no thrifting, like record shopping, sure, but like clothes, like absolutely not. I don't mind paying like a premium and an added value for someone to do it for me who's gonna like create a style. Like, so like I have a friend, for instance, who he's really into vintage 40s and 50s and like Pachuco clothing, right? And so he goes out and he does all that. And then, and to some degree you can say, oh, he's gentrifying because he's taking stuff that's really cheap and he's selling them for a little bit more. But I actually think that he's providing people value because they know that when they go to his shop, that he's gonna have the styles that they like. He's gonna have stuff, and he it's not like he you need to get Dr. Carlos a style bundle for sure. Like part of it is I actually do have a style. It's a like it's a like 1950s style, like greaser, like chucks and stuff. But like lately pandemic, the only style I need is like whatever like I can wear around the house. But yeah, so anyway, back to my point. Sorry, I lose my train of thought. I think that there's an added value that people place here of like the sellers actually going out and actually like sifting through what their customers like expect from them, or the kind of the aesthetic that they're like going for in terms of sales. And so that's a value that I'm happy to pay for because I don't want to do it.
Well, and that's really one of the main things that we want to do with Style Crash, or is some people have the time and bring that value, right? But they should be rewarded for that, where I think on a lot of the other platforms you're just selling clothes and there's no premium paid for the work that you've put in for this style, for being able to spot something that's made really, really well. So it's also creating that community where you can say, okay, like your friend, right? Like, let's say he didn't have a store. Well, he could have a really good following on this site because, people know and people enjoy him. And I think that, with a lot of these other, with a lot of things in this space, it's like, you need the capital to invest in this. Sorry guys, it's gotten really late for me. Hold on, I'm gonna just take that back. So I think in our society, in our capitalist culture, right, if you want to make money, you have to have a bunch of capital to invest in something in the first place. And it's like, that's not the
but the investment, this is the thing about investment that people don't get. Like when you say investment, what you're really saying is I want to put money into something so I can exploit people.
Yes. And I think that what we're trying to do and what we're interested in is saying, I don't care if you have capital, you have other things that are valuable, and you should be allowed to profit off of those other things. Not everything is directly correlated to money, right? You have a sense of style. You have time to go find those good things. You have the ability to put them together well, right? Like those are all things that provide value that have nothing to do with money. And that allows, I think, it will allow people in more marginalized community to participate and gather wealth for themselves and for their community in a way that they're not able to right now because they don't have that money to start out with. And I don't think that you should need money to be able to live more than hand to mouth, right? Like you should be able to be comfortable without having inherited wealth.
And even if you do have a little bit of money to get started and start selling stuff, like, how does it feel that like somebody who like just provided you the space is taking 30% of what you went out there, you have the years of history of like styling yourself and thinking through like creative ways to like, look and sort of, like just in terms of style, like, like people don't understand that, like, there's some people that have an eye for what goes with what colors, all of that, right? That takes sort of development. You go out there and then just some random fucking investor somewhere like just took 30% of your money.
Yeah. It's a very exploitative space. And again, it's a space mostly populated by women.
Yeah.
And most of the investors are men. And you just see the same
That was
thing
actually
play out over and over again.
that was a complaint that, like, I had students, because we're gonna do some TikToks on we're developing a social media sort of campaign around this style to like when we launched the fundraiser for Style Crush. And we were talking about that. So they went on the website, they went on and looked, and they're like it's a lot of women stuff. Like, where's all the like guy like fashion stuff? There was a couple of guys.
We'll get there.
I know. I told them that. I said, we'll get there. So that's a good critique. Maybe we make some TikToks.
Absolutely.
People, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's actually that's something we've been thinking about and talking about a lot, right? It's like, how do we make sure that the space is as inclusive as possible? And I think and that starts with who's in charge, right? Like our steering committee that we have right now is made up of a very diverse group of people. I should say diverse group of women. We don't have any men yet. But diverse age, size, location, our backgrounds, and I think that is what really changes the game, right? When you have people in the room making decisions that do have a diverse perspective. And I think that's why we don't see greater change anywhere, but definitely not in fashion, right? Because it's mostly rich white old dudes who, they want to do the thing that they do that makes them a lot of money, and they don't care about exploiting people. So
yeah. Rebecca had some follow-up questions.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think just the main kind of thing that I was wondering or wanted to hear your thoughts on is, what do you think is the most important step to take to shift some of the burden off of the individual? Because I know that it's like really, like, it's a really heavy burden to have to like constantly think about, okay, well, like, where's this piece coming from? Like, are they using sustainable methods or ethical methods? Are they, and it obviously to some extent it is part, like the individual has to play their part in order for there to be any change. Like, what do you think is an important first step to getting to a place where we can hold these like companies accountable for their sustainability and whatnot?
Yeah. Are you asking what's the first step on a more like on a broad level, or what is the first step that you as an individual could take? Because I think those are maybe a little different answers.
I think as an individual, more like what can each person do to get to that place?
Yeah. I think that the best thing that you can do is lend your voice and support to people that are already doing the work, right? There are really great organizations out there that already have things in place, and they just need more voices and more manpower, right? So there's Remake is really great. The Garment Workers Center in LA is really great. Those are the two that immediately pop into my head. But they also will like connect you to bunches of other ones because they all work in that space. Honestly, as an individual, I think we are so much stronger as a collective. So I'd say, like, don't worry about individual action. Just go on their sites, see, okay, they have tons of actions that you can take and say, okay, which one can I do today? And which one can I do tomorrow? And, and just stay engaged with them, right? I think there's no way we can do this. There's no way we can create systemic change if it's not a constant practice, right? It's not something we can just show up once for and leave. And what we're able to do and what kind of work we're able to take on is really going to it changes and fluctuates over time, and that's okay, right? So maybe one day it's all you can do is sign a petition, and maybe another day it's I can donate $10, and maybe another day it's, oh, I can call my senator, right? So it's really I think just staying engaged with people that are already doing that work.
Another good resource, since a lot of our listeners are sort of college age, is the Students Against Sweatshops. Like, they have chapters on all kinds of universities, and they're trying to get one started up at Cal State Long Beach. And so that's sort of a good entry point to get into that. And I'd like to add a little bit something. I think a lot of times people feel so much pressure to like individually create the change, like you said. And so, like, one, understand that that all we're trying to do is like be better than the current system, right? So like, and it's going to take a long time to really create massive change, but like, acknowledge that there is technically no ethical consumption under capitalism. And so all we can do within that context is harm, like you said, harm reduction. Like, so like, I know that, when I buy, Converse, I love wearing Chucks. Like, I know that, like, when they run out on me, like, I have a pair that's like got like a bunch of holes because I've been using them when I'm working on my car. I need to go get a new one, new pairs. Like, I know that there's no like ethical consumption, but like, there is a lot of like companies that I specifically won't buy because I know that they use sweatshop labor. And technically, I know that I still buy clothes from places that use that, but I don't do it as often. It's sort of same philosophy I have with, people are like, my sister's vegan, and she's like, why don't you become vegan? I was like, well, since you became vegan, I started eating less meat, just because I can't make the full conversion, but I do understand that we need to reduce the harm. And so you do the best that you can.
Yeah, and I think everybody has different ways that they can go about it, right? And there are different ways to reduce harm, right? Like, I mean, I think the vegan example is great, right? Being vegan is great, but it's also problematic in its own way, right? Like, sometimes you're having food that is highly processed or shipped from across the world. So is that more problematic?
Or it reduces the like access to that same food in like the native areas. So like quinoa,
right.
Was it quinoa?
Right. Or, is that better or worse than the person who eats meat that is raised and butchered locally? It's really, I think you have to find the least amount of harm in the most places, right? And like, maybe my place of doing the most harm reduction is in fashion and the amount of things that I consume. And maybe for somebody else, it's food and the cleaning supplies they use, right? Like, there's so many terrible things in the world. The whole system is set up to exploit and kill the planet and all the brown people on it, all the poor people on it. That I think it's really about finding ways to reduce that harm and doing it as much as you can while trying to stay sane, because like, you cannot do it by yourself. And no one will listen. Even if you tried, no one's going to listen to you.
That's why it's like, do the best you can, right? Because sometimes I get the people who like oh, you bought your Converse and those are, and I'm like, yeah, but like, I see your thing, and then I start pointing fingers back, and it's like, look, they're understand there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and all we can do is just be as best ethically as we can until we get to a system that is more ethical, and as we build a system that's more ethical. And that's why the cooperative stuff is for me, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to teach people how to like manage the resources and the services and community, economics that people need, so it's community owned, controlled, and it benefits the community ultimately. But yeah.
And one last point that I think is important to make, right, is I think it's also really easy for people to let themselves off the hook by saying, oh, well, I'm doing the best I can. And it's like, well, are you? Right? Like, doing the best you can doesn't necessarily mean staying in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Right? Like, those aren't the same thing. Right? Like, maybe it's slightly uncomfortable for me to do this thing that's a little harder, but I can't actually do it. So I think it's also like staying really honest with yourself about what can I do? How can I stretch myself just a little bit? How can I stretch myself without breaking? Right? So that over time, that amount of good that you can put out into the world increases.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, when I first started my ethical fashion journey, right, it was maybe 1 in every 5 pieces that I got was an ethical piece. Um, but things were still new, and that, that's got problems. And now, now I buy most of my stuff uh secondhand. But you know what? I can't buy everything secondhand because sometimes I cannot find the thing that I need in the way that I need it. Like I can't. Right. And so I think it's really easy. I live a I I would say I live like a pretty eco-friendly lifestyle now. It's not perfect, but I live a pretty eco-friendly lifestyle and have for some time. And I think people, it's very easy, especially because I talk about this so much, for people to look at me and be like, oh, well, she must do it perfectly. I must do it perfectly. But like that's not true, right? Like that's just not. I had to recently, buy a pair of shorts from Target. And I was real mad about it. But like I could not, I I, I just could not find what I was looking for other than that, right? Like big confession, guys. I still use paper towels in my house. Not a lot, but I have 3 cats and they puke, and I'm not going to pick that up with a microfiber. Then I then have to, or not a microfiber, like a Swedish cloth that I then have to wash because that's just disgusting. So, I have my paper towels. And I think that's the thing that we have to keep in mind. Like, how do you keep that balance of I'm human, I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm still going to stretch myself, but I'm not going to beat myself up too much, right? Like, you got to find that sweet spot.
Yeah. And when you're just progressively trying to get better, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Genesis, you said you had something you wanted to ask, and then you can kind of wrap up and sort of share some things that you think we should be working on doing, resources. You've already mentioned a couple of awesome organizations. The Garment Worker Center is excellent. I recently donated to them because Benita made me my Bernie.
Yay.
Okay, I had one last question since we were on the topic of no ethical consumption under capitalism. During quarantine, I think a lot of people, especially like young people on TikTok, became aware of this phrase, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And they viewed that phrase not so much in like a harm reduction kind of way, but in a way that was really like, since everything I do is going to be unethical anyway, let me just buy everything. And we saw a lot of super fast fashion companies like Shein and Zaful become very popular. People doing huge like $300 hauls of super cheap, bad quality, very trendy clothes from Shein and Zaful. And it's like, well, there's no ethical consumption anyway. So what are your thoughts on these things?
Yeah. I mean, like, not to shit on anybody, but like that's a very immature way to take that, right? Like that to me feels like a very young perspective. And I don't necessarily even mean young as in like a physical age, but like young in terms of how we think about things, right? Like it's a very unformed way of thinking, and uninformed way as well, right? There's no nuance there. There's just no nuance. And so I think we have to, and I think this is actually part of like a larger issue that we should work on, I think, as a society, right, is like bringing back nuance. Nuance is very important. And really helping people to think critically and in a way that doesn't allow for these kind of like black and white statements. Because yes, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, but also, are you going to raise your flax and then spin it into fiber and then get dressed, right? Like there's just
I have some comments too. So like I think
Yeah.
that's like if I heard somebody say that, I would literally just tell them you're a horrible human being.
Yeah.
Just be like, and so like I know you were dancing around it. Like I'm just gonna go and say, I'm like, you know,
Okay.
fuck you. Like if you say that to me, because what you're saying in that context, like, oh, I don't care, since there is no ethical consumption, I'm not gonna give a shit. That what you're saying is you don't give shit about my mom. You don't.
It's a very self-centered point of view.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Like,
right? It's you know, it's a straw man argument. It's a self-centered point of view. It's just there's just, what are we, 5? Like, come on.
A very like defeatist kind of attitude, like might as well not try, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
It's when like these TikToks like willingly know that some of these companies use like child labor, and then they make fun of it. They're like, oh, like look how badly like this child made my piece of clothing. And I'm like, so you're fully aware of like the atrocities that happen within this industry, and yet you're just gonna make like a joke from your very privileged like standpoint. It's just like sickening.
Well, and I think we've done so much to like keep the others separate, right? To say, oh, well, those are the people over there, so we don't have to have empathy for them, right? Like our society and our culture has fostered that point of view for so long because it is the only way that people can live with themselves, doing the horrible things colonialism and imperialism has done, right? Is just making sure that no one else is human but those of us right here. And like, yeah, you're just a shitty person. Like, let's foster some empathy, man. Like, come on.
And for me, that's the when I make that statement, the reason I make it is okay, so if there's no ethical consumption or capitalism, that means we have to create something different. That means we have to create like a system that empowers the people making our clothes, right? That can't be capitalism. So like it's like, okay, you're gonna be lazy ass and not even try, and you're gonna be a terrible human being, or are you gonna humanize people that actually contribute to your life? You know, they provide you the clothes that you like literally are wearing on your back. And so like I was saying, like for me, when people say that, I was like I will start talking shit in public. I don't care. That's my mom you're saying that you don't give a shit about.
Yeah.
And that's such an American mentality to have, to not care about just because it's not happening here. We shouldn't care about it, and it's like such
or because it's not happening to me, right? Like, oh, it's like I'm not affected by it. Yeah,
and it's a worldwide issue. Like that's like, it's like so bad in Asia, so bad in other countries, and just because it's abroad, people have no sensibility.
Yeah, like for me, it's like, and the reason. So when you said young, like it's, you know, it's an ungrown mentality.
Exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. It's not about, I don't mean young as an age, right? Yeah. Like you can be young mentally and you can be dumb at 70. You know, like it's not about age.
We've seen the Trump supporters.
Our former president was very, very young. But yeah, I mean, that to me just sort of shows a lack of imagination, honestly. Like, you know, when I think about that statement, when people say that, like, that means just because things like suck right now, don't you want it to get better? Don't you want to be someone who contributes to making the world a better place and improving the conditions for the people that like provide us all of the different things that we use and need on a daily basis? Like, you're an immature, like selfish, like a-hole if you continue.
Yeah, it's very like Ayn Rand, very libertarian kind of each man for himself, which I mean, that's bullshit, right? Like, we evolved as creatures within a community, right? Like, that is literally how we evolved to be in community. We don't do well outside of community. So trying to pretend that we can is just complete fallacy. Like, you are just literally not looking at reality if you think you can do things on your own. Like, oh, did you pave the roads? Did you install the sewage system? The electrical wire? Like, you know, like, do you take out your own garbage and take it to the dumpster? Like, I mean, just on and on, right? Like, it's just,
yeah, that's a commodity fetishism, right? Like, you're gonna cut down
your reality at all.
You're gonna cut down your own tree. You're gonna go get the water. You're gonna go get the water from the river yourself. Like all of it. Yeah, for sure.
I hate everything.
That's what we do. That's what our podcast is basically, us talking shit about all things that we hate.
I hate everything.
All right. Well, I think that was a very informative and successful podcast for today. So we are going to be linking on our Instagram page some resources that you guys can look into in regards to sustainability. So Benita, if there's anything you want to plug now for in regards to like people you can follow, any organizations that are working, because I know you said that that's like the most important thing that you can do. And we also want to be able to provide resources for our listeners to be able to participate in the fight for sustainability and
or any campaigns that you want to sort of plug. You mentioned the one in LA. I think it was SB 1399. I think
that sounds right. I'm sorry. I don't have it on me, and I can't. I'm terrible with numbers.
No worries. We just want to make sure we get the information out there.
Thank you. Yes, that one is super important. Remake is a great organization to follow, especially if you're just starting out, because they just have tons and tons of campaigns, tons and tons of ways to get involved. I love the Garment Workers Center in LA. Those are great. You can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is actually changing from fashion a bit right now to more things about parenthood, just because as I have become a mom, I have realized, I mean, man, there is very hard to be sustainable as a parent if you don't have a ton of money. And if I thought that the ethical fashion space was rich and white, the mom space, we got nothing on that. It is all white, all rich. It's a whole thing. So especially if you're a new parent or just a parent at all, you can follow me, because apparently that's the thing that I talk about now.
Yeah, so we're actually going to link the resources that Benita mentioned, as well as any other resources that we have in regards to sustainability and steps you can take. So we will be linking that in our Instagram sometime in the future. So we really hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Sembrando Ideales. Thank you so much again, Benita, for joining us and sharing your story.
We're so incredibly grateful. Sorry, Rebecca. I just want to reiterate, like, one, I know that you're busy because you're momming. Two, like, you're on the East Coast, and like it just always means a lot to us when you are able to share your time with us, and especially to get education out about these really important issues.
Thank you. No, I so appreciate this. This is always, I just love talking shit on the system. So it's great to have a place to do it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for all the information you share with us and all your insight. It really means a lot to us. For sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys next episode on Sembrando Ideales.